Hi, I'm Callie Wave, and this is a drawing I did of my boyfriend's Final Fantasy character. He was talking about a lot. I've never played Final Fantasy, and anytime we were on the phone and he was playing, he would be like 9 times out of 10, somebody would compliment him on his character. And I hadn't seen it before that, but as a kind of half surprise to him, I wanted to make a uh, desktop wallpaper for him of his Final Fantasy character since he likes the game a lot and he basically had made the skin for it. So I was like, I'll just do that. And initially, I was going to go with this composition. However, there was an issue of I didn't know what a chocobo looked like. And I made the mistake of not looking until after I drew half of this. Because I thought it was smaller, because initially I was going to try to do the chick version of it. And that's the design I have on the right side. Like, I was initially going to have it looking up in the Moogle. But I ended up just scrapping that. But this kind of worked out because this was additional practice for me for drawing the character. Since I did a study of it beforehand just so I could get the face and everything in the structure and the colors and whatnot. However, I did a portrait for that, and I was doing a more complex pose for this. And I added the Moogle because this is one of my boyfriend's favorite characters, the one that travels around delivering mail. At least I think that's how it works. I know they just show up and they're like, we have a letter for you. Here you go. I think that's how it works. I, again, still haven't played Final Fantasy. I think this is 14? Is what he plays? Yeah. So then, this was when I saw the Chocobo, and I was like, oh, this isn't going to work. And so I just scrapped the whole thing and just made a completely new, more dynamic design. Because I had this idea in my head, like, part way through, and I was like, oh, that would be really cool to do, but I would have to do this completely over. Which I ended up doing anyway, and I don't regret it. However, there's a reason this is faster than ones that I have done initially. And it's because I am doing 3 characters here, and the majority of this is just me doing line work. Because I just am doing layer on top of layer on top of layer of line work. Until I got it right. Because when I initially did the character, it looked too much like me. Like, that's a weird thing that happens. It's like I have same face syndrome. Because animals I'm more familiar with, but faces are still kind of a struggle, and I hadn't done them in a long time, and in a more cartoony style, even less, because that's something that I've just never really had fully done before. So I was just struggling and just trying to figure out the face shape and just adjusting constantly. And on top of it, I was still getting used to line work. I'm still not used to line work. I don't enjoy doing line work. More in the sense, let me reiterate that. I like it in traditional mediums because you can feather it. In programs like this, and with the kind of pen that I was using, because I'm just using a basic brush for this. I'm not doing anything like super crazy. I just set it to have a higher pressure sensitivity, and that was it. That's all I did. But because of the type of brush this is, feathering it doesn't really work like you can, like with traditional, because you can just take the pencil and just keep going on the same line. That's a lot harder to do in digital mediums. And when I was looking up tutorials for it, a lot of people were like, yeah, you just keep doing the line and then hit undo. And it's like, yeah, I could in theory do that. Do I want to? Not really. I don't find that ideal because I'm not looking because that feels like a very perfectionist kind of thing that I am trying to depart myself from. So I kind of half did it and then half didn't. And you'll see later, there was a point where even if I did it perfectly, it wouldn't have mattered because I had to thin down the lines anyway, and I wasn't going to redo it. I just took an eraser and just reduced the lines. Like this hand, I made super thick initially, and then I go in and, like, reduce it. Because when I was doing the line art, I had an idea in mind. I had, like, a general idea in mind of what I wanted the line weight to be overall, but then that kind of got thrown out the window because I got too hyper focused. There's a lot of different things going on. Like, she has dragon scales and stuff, and apparently this is a cane that I don't understand. Somebody can explain it. I know it looks like a staff to me. I was told it's called a cane. Anyway. But overall, because I wanted different line weights, like I wanted the Moogle because it's closer to be larger line weight, so I ended up having to reduce the lines of this anyway. So even if I did do it where it was like, oh, you make a line and then you hit undo, I don't know if that would have really mattered for this. Because I wouldn't have reduced it anyway. And that seems to just work for me. And I did a lot, like, after doing the character, the Chocobo and the Moogle became super easy because I was already trained and getting used to doing the line work. And you can see here, I'm doing more, like, larger brush strokes and whatnot. But if it's like a bigger piece, I'm not doing it. Like the body, like that whole neck and kind of like chest area, I didn't do that all in one piece. I was just like, nope, that's not happening. But for feathers, it's like you kind of have to do that, I feel like, to get the feel of it. But even then, I don't know. It was one of those situations where I just went back and forth between people are saying, do it this way. But then struggling to do it that way because I don't have the skill level to do that, and then getting frustrated and then going back to my original methods of like feathering and then just erasing the line as needed, which I end up having to do anyway. So it was like one of those debates in my head of like, I know people are saying to do this, but I don't know, it felt like a very all or one answer. Like for art, you don't have just a one and done, this is how you do it. Like for certain things you kind of do, but there's usually some other alternative that you can do. Like it seems like a lot of people like kind of all do a very similar way. Like a lot of them do a very similar way of doing line art and trying to follow that, but it's also the thought process of, do I have to? Because my thing is, even with like traditional mediums, you have different ways that you can do it, and you have different people have different styles, different levels of talent and things that they're willing to do. It's just, I don't know, it was just a struggle in my brain because it's like, you have to do it this way. It's like, I really don't. I don't have to do it this way. Would it be easier? I don't know. It could be. Depends on the stuff. And the program's kind of finicky when I was trying to do it. Like, and I did the letters. It was easier, but that's because I was just doing straight lines. But sometimes there's like sometimes a loss in translation. You see it sometimes. Like, it still does this. Where my tablet, like when I do something, sometimes a random just large dot will appear. And I don't know how that's happening, because it's not, like, I'm not changing my pressure or anything, but somehow there's a loss in translation. So there's a dot that just shows up, and it's like, now I have to undo the entire line because this thing is happening. So that might just be a mix of a skill issue, which I know it is. And and maybe a program issue as well. But I ended up figuring out a way to be able to do this a lot better, and then I ended up working with the eyes again because they just felt kind of off, and then I'm just doing little touch-ups and everything. And there is a part that I skip of this. So I figured out a way to better do the coloring for for the artwork, especially if it has like line art involved and I want different layers for different things. So the way that I have to do it, because it's a fake photo, it works a little bit differently than any other thing. Like, I know for Procreate and Photoshop, I think it's like you do a mask layer and then you can like color within the mask layer, you can draw within the mask layer, and it won't go past that part of the shape. You have to do it kind of different in this one. Like, you have to create the fill, and then you create the layer, and then you have to hit arrange and move inside. I don't know if that's just an old way of doing it. I don't know if that's just Symphony Photo's way of doing it. It was never something I did before because I obviously never really did anything like that in digital painting. I usually just worked on one or two, like a handful of layers. So you can see here, that's kind of what I did, but I did it for like each individual piece. So like the scales are its own thing on the face. The face skin is its own thing. The irises are their own thing. So that took me, to do all of this, took me at least 3 hours. I know it took me at least 3 hours, and I'm like, I don't need to talk during that. I could just explain that here. So here we are. So I don't have to, so then you guys don't have to sit through it, and I don't have to talk about it while I was going through it. The power of editing. We love it here. So this is me then going through, and the scales were a little bit tricky because it was the debate of, I didn't want to make line art for each individual part of the scales. That just felt like a little too much for what it was. Plus the character's farther away, so you can't really see it anyway. So what I did instead was I was taking a darker layer and just implying the shadows. And then did a similar thing with the horns as well. And I feel like I really like how I did the horns. Like, it definitely defines the shape a lot more for that. And for the hair, I know I have to go and fix this later because there is a point where I put everything in and the light source is kind of strange. I also kept forgetting to put the shadow in too, but big shadows I always forget to do. But I had to fix the hair later because technically the face wouldn't be on that back part. Like it's the character's right. That part of hair, it wouldn't be like that. It would have been farther back. But you see that later. And for the rest of this was actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be, but that's because the power of studies, man, like, that really, really helped me. Because all of the color picking that I did for the study itself. And then I just pulled from that and just went with it. And just had to add a few more for the actual, because I just did a portrait level for the study. And then for this, I had to do more. And I didn't do the cane in the study either. And I just kept messing with it. Because for the cane, it was a little bit of a struggle. In the sense of, like, what colors I wanted to do, because for his actual cane, it's, like, 3 different colors. But it just looked awkward, so I just made it all one color. I'm not dealing with this. And then there's a lot of designs on the, basically, cardigan itself. I just did a basic one all around the bottom edge of it. What would be the bottom edge, where the tassels are. Basically, and that's all I did, and I just did a very basic design for that. And yeah, the shading was a lot easier for me, but I think that's because, one, I have been doing it so much, because with the combination of the desert one, this sunflower and the landscape one that I had recently done, I had gotten more used to how the shading works and I'm more familiar with my brush, so that made this significantly easier. And yeah, it was just super quick compared to line art. Like, you can tell I'm not as, like, when it comes to line art, that took way longer because that's not something I'm used to. When it comes to shading, I'm used to that. It doesn't matter if it's traditional or, you know, or digital. That's probably the first one I'm going to figure out. Yeah, and then I go in and I'm just, again, I adjust that shadow later. But the chocobo wasn't actually that difficult to do because I wasn't going to imply every single feather. It was just like, I just need the basic, you know, the outline of the feathers, and then that was it. And everything else is leather based. I know he had a different skin for the chocobos, my boyfriend did, but I just went with the basic one because that was in the original screenshots he sent me. And then he sent me the secondary ones, and I was like, I'm not doing that. Like, it had a whole elaborate thing with, like, you know, it had, like, an overhang on it, basically, for shade. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. And then I added more shine to the cane. And then I finally moved on to the Moogle. And the Moogle was actually very straightforward. I think the hat was like the biggest struggle for me because it's an angle and it's covering one of the ears. And then just, this was when I realized that I needed to figure out where the light source was going to be. And then once I figured that out, I had to adjust the shadows on the other two to do that. And that's me fixing the hair there. And so once I figured out that shading, that made everything else significantly easier. Because I didn't want to make a super hard shadow for myself either. I'm lazy. It's like, what can I do to make this appealing and give it the dimension that I want? And that's basically how I approach most things. If I really wanted to do really dynamic shadows, I'll probably do that later. I'm still getting used to the program, so I know I just boasted about being good with shadow shading and stuff, but you know, we're still a work in progress. I can be proud of myself for certain things, okay? And then for the grass, because I did the previous one, this was a little bit easier, but also a little difficult because I had the struggle of trying to figure out how much of the grass that I really want to show. And then added a little bit more detail to make it be like, yeah, this shadow's on grass, and then trying to figure out where the shadows should be based on, like, because the Moogle's, like, supposed to be high up in the air, and then everything else is obviously on the ground. And then forgot that shadow, so I had to adjust that. And here is Gideon's reaction. Okay, Gideon. Sit.
Okay, I sit. I gotta get by you.
You have to sit down.
Okay.
You ready?
Ready. I like it, and I'm gonna set it.
What?
You just have to send it to me.
Well, yeah. But you actually like it?
Yes, I like it.
But
Of course I like it.
Oh, okay.
E actually did the horns really well, too.
Yeah, they were a little,
Finicky?
No, they weren't as hard as you think they would be. They're actually a pretty, it's just the curve that you have to figure out, but I had figured it out in the study first, and then was able to do it very easily from this. So, I'm glad you like it. I'll remove
I like it.
I'll remove the signing
I figure you'll remove that.
for you.
Well, yeah. But yeah, I like it. And then when you send it to me, it's gonna get set.
Okay. Yay.
Bunk. Me.
Okay.
Bunk.
So yeah, thanks for watching. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed this. Subscribe. I have a Patreon. You can go check that out. Hope you guys liked it. Bye.